As a police officer, we base our careers off of factual evidence.
It's just a typical shift. Looking forward to a boring night.
What made me want to be a police officer was my attraction to action.
I had to get out as fast as I could.
I felt helpless.
Just couldn't believe what I had seen.
It changes your opinion on the supernatural.
You can't deal with something that you have no idea about.
There was no police training when it comes to this. By far, this is one of the strangest experiences of my life. I can't put my finger on it and say why, but it happened.
The greater St. Louis area is more than a gateway to the West. It's home to over 3 million people. And keeping them safe is Officer Sean Heffley.
I've been a police officer for almost 20 years now. I am the only person in my entire family that's a police officer. It was a calling.
Have the alarm company respond, please.
Being a police officer, most of us, I would say, are less likely to believe in things that are unexplained, the supernatural. This is something that is not talked about a lot. This is taboo.
St. Louis Police Department, Sub 36. Yes, hi. I haven't heard from my mother in at least 5 days, and I'm getting worried. This is very unusual. We just send someone to check on them and make sure nothing has happened.
This old home on the edge of town has been quieter than usual. An elderly woman lives here with 3 of her adult grandchildren. But no one has seen any of them for almost a week. Officer Heffley is sent to investigate.
We handle quite often the welfare calls, which is what this was. On November 26, 2006, this was a Sunday just after Thanksgiving, this family was concerned because they hadn't seen or spoke to their relatives in several days, and they were concerned for their safety. I asked my partner to respond to the house with me.
St. Louis Police? I'm gonna head around back.
It was important to try to get into the house because if somebody was needing assistance, we would be able to offer that to them as quickly as possible. Nothing had sparked my suspicion that something was not right. I suddenly felt myself getting peppered with bullets. I could feel the bullets going in me.
Officer down! Officer down!
I'm trying to stay conscious. I'm trying to stay alert. I'm doing everything I can to keep going and to keep fighting.
Hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. Oh.
Officer Heffley is rushed to the hospital with multiple bullet wounds. Back at the home, police have a 5-hour standoff with the assailant, whose identity remains unknown.
He was armed with a rifle and a handgun. A sniper wound up shooting him.
The shooter, who dies at the scene, is identified as Michael Inman, a former Marine and the missing woman's grandson.
At that time, there was still the unknown. There was 3 people missing from the house at that point. Police had been there for several days processing the crime scene. I found out later that the bodies were discovered in the basement. In a closet. He murdered his family.
Michael Inman killed his grandmother and his 2 sisters.
I mean, he was normal at one point. He was a Marine. He protected our country. I don't know what made him snap. Maybe he was going through PTSD. Or maybe he heard voices. Maybe they said something to him, telling him to do something.
The victims and the gunman are buried. The home is abandoned, and all the power and telephone lines are cut. Although Officer Heffley was hit by 4 bullets, none of them proved fatal.
I definitely consider myself very lucky to be alive. I was off work for 4 to 5 months. When I came back to work, this is when it all started.
What's the address of your emergency? What's going on?
When I came back to work, the house called 911. There was between 5 and 10 calls. How is that even possible? How does a house that has no power, no phone, no gas running to it, how was there 911 calls? So I did look it up in the computer, and I did see that there were 911 calls that were coming from the house. However, nobody could explain why. I felt compelled to go there. I felt like the house was calling me. I worked night shift. I was in full uniform in a marked police car, and all I had was my flashlight with me. I got out of the car. I stood in front of the house. I noticed that there was 4 crosses put up in front of the house. 3 of them for the victims, and 1 of them for him. So I started moving forward. It was dark, it was chilly outside, and to be honest with you, it looked like a house out of Nightmare on Elm Street. It was very creepy. I had this overwhelming feeling like I was not alone. I went towards the back of the house. I started becoming overwhelmed with feelings as I got to the backyard. I can't really put my finger on it, how it felt. It just felt surreal.
Officer down! Stay back up!
I stood there for a moment, and I had to build up the courage to go in. I took a gigantic, very deep breath, and I held it for a second, and I made entry into the house through the back door. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going to happen. There was no police training when it comes to this.
911. Hello. Is there anyone there?
Three people were murdered inside this house just outside St. Louis. And Officer Heffley almost lost his own life here.
Officer down! Shots fired! Send back up!
Now, he's back investigating a series of 911 calls made from the abandoned home, even though the phone lines have been cut.
The house was calling me. It's impossible. It can't happen. I'm a police officer. I want to know facts. I can only imagine what was going through their minds when this was happening to them. They were completely helpless. And to be brutally murdered like that is just beyond me. It was my responsibility to protect the people in my community.
Hello?
My heart was racing. I felt that feeling of wanting to get out. But I knew I needed to push it aside. So I made my way down the stairs, and that musty basement smell was heavy. When I reached the bottom of the steps, I could see the dust that had been accumulating over the time that the house was not maintained. And that's when I saw the Ouija board. As I shined my light down towards it and got closer to it, I noticed the marker was on the letter U. was pointing towards me. My feeling at the time was disbelief. I couldn't believe that this was happening. I felt that the people that were brutally murdered wanted to see me. The bodies were discovered in the closet. I could feel my adrenaline immediately spike. I felt constricted. I felt like I couldn't breathe very well. It was an overwhelming feeling to run. But I knew I needed to push through that. I needed to see inside that closet. This family was brutally murdered and shoved into a closet in a basement. I felt like they were calling me.
St. Louis Police Department. I haven't heard from my mother in 5 days.
Officer Heffley of the St. Louis Police has been drawn back to the scene of a horrific triple murder.
I knew I needed to see inside that closet. In my brain, everything is slowed down, so I can replay it over and over in my head. There was a cool breeze that ran right through me, right through my body, and it immediately made the hair on my neck and my arms and my legs stand up. You could say it was spirits. You could say it was the family that had been murdered. They overtook my body. I remember apologizing to them that I wasn't there for them when this happened. Anything else, I don't recall what I said. It was how I felt at the time and what I wanted to say to get off my chest at the time, so I would have peace, and so would they. I felt relief. But then I felt something else. I felt like he was there too. It was not peaceful anymore. It was not comforting anymore. Something bad was going to happen to me if I stayed. I knew I had to get out of this as fast as I could. And I ran. I ran up the stairs. I ran out back of the house. I'm telling you what, as soon as I got outside, I felt relief. I could breathe again. When you think back of all the other stories you've heard in the past, and you kind of just discounted them because there were stories, there was no factual basis to it all. But when it happens to you, it changes your opinion on the supernatural. After I left the house, the 911 calls stopped to To my knowledge, there was never any more.
Several years after the murders, the house is sold. Within weeks of moving in, the new owner begins to hear voices. He moves out shortly afterwards.